Please remember to like, subscribe, and rate on your favorite podcast platform.
Trigger warning. This podcast contains discussion of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, and includes explicit language. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
For me, when I had my daughter, that was the biggest shift for me. You know, now she's 8. And when I wrote the book over the last 3 years, during that time, she was at the age where like horrific things were happening to me. And to see the life that I've created for her. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and how safe she feels and, you know, how she can just express herself and just be who she is like such a gift.
Without healing, traumatic experiences can have an enormous impact on defining who we are and who we will become.
Wade Robson and myself, James Safechuck, are both survivors of childhood abuse. In this podcast, we're talking with survivors, trauma specialists, and advocates,
highlighting the many resources available in order to inspire the brave steps to starting or continuing the healing journey.
This is From Trauma
to Triumph.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast From Trauma to Triumph, hosted by Wade Robson and myself, James Safechuck. Today's guest is Kimberly Shannon Murphy. She is a leading Hollywood stuntwoman who has served as a double for numerous A-list actresses, performing in 133 feature films and television shows, including Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Captain America, The Hunger Games, and Westworld. Kimberly has written a new memoir entitled GLIMMER, a story of survival, hope, and healing. In her book, she details her painful story of being sexually abused by her grandfather as a small child, the aftermath of intergenerational familial abuse, and her heroic healing journey.
Kimberly was so incredibly open and vulnerable with us in our conversation as we discussed topics such as her struggles with eating disorders, with self-harm, with intimate relationships, and ultimately her journey towards healing, towards self-love, and the immense impact of becoming a parent of a beautiful little girl. We really hope you guys enjoy.
Hi.
So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So well.
Nice to meet you, Kimberly.
For having me.
We got that nice setup there.
Yeah, you looking fancy over there with that whole setup.
This is my podcast house now.
Your podcast house. Is there so many going on? Podcasts?
There's a lot happening. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that? Like, you know, I mean, doing a whole kind of like media blitz for anything is interesting, but then I don't know. We had a bit of that experience with the film, and like, you know, what's that like doing it for this reason?
Honestly, I think my first podcast was with a doctor, and that was incredible because you get this validation of your life that you never had before.
Right.
From an actual doctor. And so it was very good for me, like mentally, I feel like.
Right. Yeah, I get that.
I obviously watched all of your things, and like if I start talking about it, I'll cry. So, but you guys are so brave, and just to go out there and speak about what you spoke about and who you had to speak about, I can't imagine what that must have been like for you guys. So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. You as well. I mean, anytime you come out and are vulnerable and show yourself and it's tough. So
yes.
Yeah.
It would seem to me in you coming forward in this way with a book, there's a different kind of version that I imagine you're dealing with, in the sense that we had, you know, mostly we had support from our family, right? In coming forward in this way, we knew we were going to be dealing with, you know, haters in another realm that we didn't really know, right? And I don't know what the situation is with the rest of your family as far as what that's like in coming forward with this truth about your family's experience, you know?
Yeah. I've had to go no contact with my family pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
When I think everyone thought it was really cute when I decided I was going to write a book about it. And then when I actually got a book deal, it became very real for everybody. And most of my family stopped talking to me.
Wow. How long has that been now, like that status?
Well, in the book, we have a fictitious sister, but I actually have 3 sisters in real life.
Okay.
And my one oldest sister hasn't spoken to me in 3 years because they all are under the assumption that sweeping everything under the carpet is actually what actually helps, when it's actually the complete opposite.
Right.
Yeah, I think we had wondered when we were preparing for this, we were wondering about your sister. She's like kind of in there, but she's not really. So we're like, wonder if there's something there that she didn't want to be. And so.
Yes, she's my middle sister. But we kind of we didn't feel right about not writing about any siblings. But also with that said, we wanted to have some presence of a sibling being in the book. So that's why she's just sort of spoken about in this way where she's there, but there's no real interaction. And my goal, their stories are not my story to tell. And the only thing that I want this book to do is to help survivors. And if I had this book at 15, for me, it would have changed my life. So that's why I did it. And I didn't do it to hurt anybody in my family. And I know that everyone is surviving the best way they think it is the best way for them and their families. And I have my own feelings about that. But with that said, I wanted to respect the fact that they didn't want to be involved in the story.
How long has it been, even just this journey of moving towards creating this book, would you say?
I wanted to write it 20 years ago, but I was a hot mess. So I was not prepared
right.
to do it. But since the beginning of starting it to finishing it, it's been almost 3 years.
Okay. I mean, it's, one thing, there's many phases, I imagine, that there has been for us and for you as far as speaking about this truth at all in your life and with different people. And there's all those phases that can be so terrifying. And then now you're on the precipice of this kind of whole, different, weird, amazing experience and way of speaking your truth. I mean, how does it feel kind of being on the precipice of this release now?
It was really interesting because when I did my first podcast, the week up to it, because writing a book and then I didn't read the audiobook. I had one of my actresses read it because it was too emotional. And I'm like, this poor engineer is going to be here for 3 years trying to get me to speak all of this out loud. So I had one of my actresses read it. And I had a ghostwriter as well. So I think reading your story and then hearing your story spoken from someone else is so surreal. And I'm sure you may have felt a little bit of that when you watched. I don't know if you guys watched your documentary, but you're like, is this actually my life? Was this my life? Like, is this actually or am I talking about somebody else? There's this really weird thing that I was feeling. Yeah. And so the week up to the podcast, I was like, well, I'm obviously just going to die before I get to actually speak about it. Because I wrote about it and someone else read it, but I hadn't verbally spoken about it yet in the world, with my family, yes, but never in the world. So I'm like, well, clearly I'm just going to drop dead or something's going to happen because this, I think it was always his voice in my head saying, don't tell, I'll kill you. That whole sort of fear that's just like embedded in you forever, that just never leaves.
Right.
And so I said that to the doctor. I said, I was for sure thought I was going to be dead before I got here.
And there's
And
something.
she said it's really normal. And I was like, okay, that's good to know.
There is something to the physical act of speaking, like actually vocalizing your story, talking about it, because we were shut down or we were told to be silent, and it's so much fear and anxiety, and you're so afraid to actually speak the words. So there's healing involved. And then there's an empowerment as well. I mean, you have to go through the pain of speaking it before you can start to feel that there's power in there as well. But that physical act of vocalizing it, actually speaking it is something else.
Yes, I agree.
And a side note, I wanted to ask, as we go through and, if and when we ever refer to your abuser, how should we? I mean, like, should we call him grandpa or grandpapa or your abuser, or just,
you can call him my grandfather. It's funny because I went through a lot of stages in my life, and it's kind of written about in the book how I didn't want to acknowledge him as my grandfather. And I just wanted to call him. And that, I think, was a defense mechanism for me, because to actually say the fact that he was my grandfather was extremely painful, because your grandparents are people that are supposed to love and protect you and be there for you. And for me, it was the complete opposite. So I think for a long time, I was like, he's not my grandfather. He's just this person. And now I'm in a very different space where I'm like, yeah, it was my grandfather, and this is who he was in my life, and this is what he did. And that's honestly who he was.
Yeah. Can relate to that for sure. I'd love to maybe sort of take you or ask you about a particular moment that's, thinking about, there's this one night, which you talk about in the book. I think you're about 14 years old and you're watching a movie with your mom. Yeah. And something happens that really that changes a lot of things. But before we get to that moment, what I'm curious about is, what was, right leading up to that moment, right before that moment, like what was going on in that sort of 14-year-old Kimberly's life, in her mind? Like what was she thinking about? What was she focused on? How was she feeling, as much as you can remember?
I think when you're abused at such a young age, there's so much confusion. I mean, when you're abused at all, but when it happens so early in your life, in your developmental stage where your brain's developing, and now there's so much scientific evidence behind all of that and how everything is developed and why we do certain things. But for me, I think I was just in general confused, because I was brought into this family and born into this family, and the abuse started so young for me. I was 2 or 3. So I didn't know any different, but I also knew that it wasn't right. And I also knew that it didn't feel right or safe. And I was confused because all the adults around me were around when this abuse was happening. I mean, they were in the home, they were, it was at parties, it was in situations, and nothing was being done, and I wasn't being protected. And so I think in general, I just was very confused about what life was supposed to be, because I think I knew deep down that this wasn't it. And then once he died and I started experiencing, I don't know if you guys had repressed memories or you just always just remembered everything that had happened to you, but I think I repressed them for a little while. But then I would have, episodes of just crying and not understanding why. And there's no 7-year-old that just cries for hours for no reason. Like, there's a reason for all of that. So all of that was happening to me, and I just didn't have an explanation for it. So I just feel like I was living in this kind of just confusion of what my life was supposed to be. And wanting someone to explain it to me, but no one was emotionally available to do that.
Right. And when you were around 14, by that point, some flashbacks, some sort of abstract memories you'd been dealing with that had been coming up already, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then that moment I'm referring to, when I think you're about 14 and you're watching this movie with your mom, can you tell us what happened then?
Well, in the movie, the woman was telling her husband about, my father molested me, and I'm having these memories, and everything started clicking for me because that was happening to me. I was having these flashbacks, and I was having these moments of just being terrified and locking myself in the closet, and everything that you shouldn't be doing at 14 or 15. And so when I saw that happening to this woman, it felt so familiar to me. And I think it was the first time in my life where that happened. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. Like, she's me. That's happening to me. And so it was a really painful moment, but also a really just kind of like a sigh of relief moment where I could just relate to somebody for the first time in my life.
Right.
Is what it really felt like.
And then you said something to your mother?
I did. Yeah. I said, I think that happened to me. And she completely freaked out and just kind of left the room. And then, the next day I was in her therapist's office, and I never even knew she had a therapist. So simultaneously we were having memories at the same time, and I did not know it because she was used by him as well.
Right. So going to that moment where you're with the therapist, that was a kind of a stressful first introduction to therapy. Can you talk a little bit about what that first experience was like?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. And I think now we're so lucky with the internet that we have this way that we can, watch these amazing doctors who've actually done the real work on trauma and how it affects your body and your brain. And we can be validated in that way, when back then that was not the case. And like I always say, just because you're in therapy does not mean that the therapist is good, and does not mean that you're actually even doing the work, And I felt that way with this woman. It didn't feel safe. It didn't feel like she was there to help me. It just felt like she, wanted answers that I frankly didn't have, because everything was so new to me. And I was just confused about all the names she was using, and nothing was explained. And so I think it's really important to recognize that just because you're seeing somebody and you're in therapy does not mean that you're actually getting help.
Right. And I try to also say you should spend the time to find the therapist that works for you, because you're not going to gel with every therapist. And also, like you pointed out, not every therapist is the same. Like there are therapists that are better than others, or at least more qualified for whatever subject. So it is worth it to find the right therapist. And that can be a process, right? You have to go in, you have to talk to somebody, you have to be vulnerable.
Yeah. And then you have to get your Cliff Notes ready, because you're just like, oh God, now I got to go in and tell my story all over again.
Right.
Which is, emotionally exhausting, and also just like re-traumatizing.
Yep.
That moment of that happening, seeing that film and disclosing to your mother, and it was such an opening to a degree. Then you had this kind of first therapeutic experience that wasn't so positive. Did that kind of send you back in at all, like in reaction to that first therapy?
Yeah. She started bringing me to somebody else, and I just wouldn't speak.
Right.
I would sit there for an hour, and my family, we didn't grow up with a lot of money. So going to therapy was a big deal. So I just decided that I just wasn't going to talk. And so I didn't, until my mom finally just gave up, because I just would go in for the hour and I just wouldn't speak.
And your mother's dealing with her abuse as well. So she's, she doesn't know.
Yes. My grandfather was I think if he was alive now and diagnosed, probably, definitely psychotic and many things. I don't know of anyone that he didn't abuse. And I think my mom, there's something about being groomed, which is what they do. And my mom lived with them until she got married at 19. And so he had this power over everybody that I'm sure you guys can relate to as well, that, he could do no wrong and no one questioned him. And whatever he said, it was just what everybody did. And that was a terrifying thing too.
Yeah, that was definitely something we were going to speak about. Obviously, he was the patriarch, and he seemed to be just so revered by all of the family, or most of the family. Yeah, like you said, he could do no wrong. I mean, as much as you can remember when you were that young, 5, 6 years old, how witnessing how much everybody loved him and how he could do no wrong, and all of the praise for him. I mean, what did that do to you at the time? How did that feel for you?
It was interesting because my family, meaning my mother and her siblings, loved him so much, and so did my grandmother. And I never had that. As I got older, I heard stories about him, about, all these positive things that he did. And, and I really always struggled with that because I only knew him as somebody I hated. And I didn't have a love for him at all, but my mom and her siblings did. And I think, my grandmother played a huge role in she was fully aware of everything that was going on and allowed it to happen. And, in my mind, she's just as guilty as he is for what happened.
Right.
And you think she was aware as it was happening, like the whole time? She's just,
oh yeah. Yeah. I don't think you live with someone who's abusing your children and your grandchildren, and on the level that he was abusing us, and not know. I just don't buy that. And also there were instances where she saw me in situations that any adult would go, what's going on here? This is not normal. And she never said a word.
Where are you at today with your feelings towards your grandmother?
I've always been kind of like the black sheep of the family, and the person who's been really loud and in everyone's face and like, let's talk about this. Let's deal with this. Like, this is not, and everyone else was the opposite. It happened. It's over. Let's move on. We're all going to have kids now. I'm like, exactly. We're all going to have kids now. So for me, when I had my daughter, that was the biggest shift for me, because to see her, now she's 8. And when I wrote the book over the last 3 years, during that time, she was at the age where like horrific things were happening to me. And to see the life that I've created for her. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how safe she feels, and, how she can just express herself and just be who she is like such a gift. And I know that I couldn't have done that if my family was around me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You had to draw those boundary lines and create that safety for yourself first, and then for your daughter, for your family.
Yeah.
And I mean, that takes so much courage, as obviously, not easy to do at all. It takes so much courage to do that. Being abused, being a survivor is so isolating anyway.
Yes.
Right. And then to take another huge act like that to draw those boundaries and separate yourself more from your family, which obviously is not a healthy and safe situation, but it's could feel like another layer of isolation or separation. It just takes another level of courage to do that.
I think I was afraid of it for a really long time. And then when I started writing my book, I reached out to Dr. Gabor Mate, who's become like one of my really close friends now. And I caught him at the perfect time because it was right before he just had a book come out. And I'm sure you're familiar with his work. He's brilliant.
Yeah. Amazing.
And he Zoomed with me like a complete stranger, just, Zoomed with me. And I told him I was writing a book, and he said something to me. And I literally say this in every podcast because I think it's so important. He said to me, which might be jarring for you guys too. He said to me, your sexual abuse was not your first trauma. Your first trauma was that you were cut off from adult support in your life. Because if you weren't cut off from adult support in your life, the abuse would have never happened.
Yeah.
Right.
That hit me so hard when I read that in the book. That resonated so deeply for me as well.
I mean, and I think when he said that to me, it made me take a really big step back and realize that I really needed to look at my whole family system and not just, okay, this is what he did and this is just his fault, because everyone participated in some way to allow this abuse to happen. Whether they were aware of it or not, everyone participated. My parents, every adult, my aunts, everyone who was around, which was a lot of people. And so I think at that point, when I started doing that really kind of inner child work, it kind of just really, they say as you really start to grow and heal, that naturally you start splitting from people that are not growing and not healing, because it's just what sort of happens because you're no longer in that space anymore. And with my family, I want them to grow and heal. And I want us to all get to a place where we can all be on that same page. I don't know that will ever happen, but it's definitely not something that I've lost faith in.
So going back, so your grandfather is the patriarch, and you have your grandmas. And do you think that they set up the dynamics of the family so that abuse can happen? I mean, so like, was there an effort to separate you from your parents, or to have there not be a closeness there?
I think that I was separated from my parents before them. I think that what he did to my mother made her unable to actually be a mother in the full sense of the word, because she was so damaged by the time she started having kids. And my father didn't come from the best family himself. And he went to Vietnam at 18. And so he had suffered a lot of trauma himself. And I also think it was a generation thing. Conversations that we're having now weren't happening then. And things that we're aware of now, we weren't aware of then. And people were having kids at a really young age when they were still children themselves and hadn't done any work on themselves. And so I think that, my dad was a drinker, and, it was just sort of like we went to their house and we did our thing and they did their thing. And that's just what it was.
When you're then thinking about becoming a parent, or I don't know if you had ideas about becoming a parent, what were those thoughts like before you actually became a parent? Was there a fear there?
Oh God, I didn't think I wanted kids for a long time. And I had my daughter late in life, and turned out to be the best gift in the entire world ever. I would never, my God, she teaches me more than I've ever taught myself. But yes, I'm learning how to be a mom every day because I didn't have that. So I think that just doing as much work as I can on myself and just really listening to her and just trying to be a safe space for her and for her to know that she can come to me about anything. And I my parents didn't have conversations with me about, these are your private parts. No one touches you here. Like those conversations weren't had. And those conversations are had in my house all the time. I mean, I'm say to my daughter all the time, no one touches you. No one puts their hands on you. This is not what we do. But those weren't conversations that we were having when I was a child. So I don't know if that would have made a difference, but we definitely weren't talking about it.
In relation to your daughter, you spoke in the book about this deep fear that, something's going to happen to her, similar to what happened to you. Where are you at with that today? I think we can speak for James. We can both relate to that fear.
You guys both have kids.
Yeah. How's that feeling today?
I don't think it ever fully goes away. I feel so much better now that she has a voice, that she can speak. When she was little, before she could talk, it was terrifying to me. Because, and now she's like in Taekwondo. I'm like the psycho mom. I'm like, okay, you Taekwondo every day of the week. Someone comes to you, you can kill them. It's fine. Someone touches you, you just kill them.
Yeah.
But it's a little aggressive. But now that she has a voice, and I always say that to her, like, you have a voice for a reason. We have it to use it. So use it. And, that's something that is very spoken about. But when she was little and you're holding this infant where you're like, okay, if I don't take care of this baby, it will die. That was terrifying for me. The first few years of her life were very challenging for me.
Yeah. So like you just mentioned, being able to, teach your daughter about her voice and how to speak up for herself, how to take care of herself, all of these moments where you're saying things to her, doing things for her that weren't done for you when you were a child, right? Every time you're able to do something like that, does it feel like you're also doing that for little Kimberly?
Yes. And I think, have you guys done any inner child work? I'm sure you have. Have you? Yeah. So that's been a whole trip that I didn't even know that existed before I started writing, actually, and realized how damaged my actual non-relationship with my child self was. But I do feel like implementing that in her now. And I also feel like, unfortunately, writing this book, she's like, Mommy, what's the book about? And so you have to be, we have a rule in our house. We don't lie. We always tell the truth. As long as you tell Mommy the truth, you will never be in trouble. Like we have this, I want her to feel like no matter what she thinks she did that was bad, or, even just as she grows up in her life, that she will never be in trouble for it, that we just speak the truth and that's what we do. Yes, I think it reinforces it when you're able to stand in your truth and say it to your child. And then you're also kind of speaking to yourself at the same time.
Right. I mean, it's making me think as you're saying this, like as far as another possible connection between us three, like the fact that when you felt ready or when it was time for you to have a child, just the divine happening of like, you have a little girl.
Yeah.
And both James and I, our first, I have one child. Okay. James has 3, but our first were boys.
Okay.
And so just this experience of going, oh my gosh, like for me, that's what a little boy looks like and thinks like and feels like and speaks like, because as you spoke about in the book, I think both of us had become so disconnected from our younger selves. So to make that connection, but just the divine happening of having this opportunity of a little girl and a little boy to keep working all this stuff out, and changing. And
I think it gives you this weird, and I keep using the word like validation, because we were so not validated in our own self as children, right? I mean, it's just what who we were didn't matter. At least that's how it feels when you're being abused like that. So I think being able to see her in her safe space and be happy and be writing this book at the same time, and her saying to me, Mommy, I want to know what the book's about. I want, her biggest thing was like, can I be on the cover of the book? And I'm like, she's like, well, my name in the book. I just want my name to be in the book. She's hilarious. But it's interesting because your parent, it's your parenting, but then there's also that sense of, the age when you were being abused, the ages when you were being abused, and you're looking at your child and you're like, holy shit, this is crazy.
Yeah.
Like this is a baby.
Yeah.
An innocent, like, baby. And this is what was happening to me. And it gives you this sense of like, yeah, that was really fucked up.
Right. As well as, like, I blamed myself for the abuse. And then when you can see your little child at that age, and you're like, this is an innocent person who just wants to be a child.
Yes.
And it helps you reconnecting or go, all right, I wasn't asking for it. It wasn't my fault, but having a kid helps with that.
And isn't that interesting that that's where everybody goes, that it was their fault?
Yeah. Right. It's just such a common denominator in the survivor's experience. Right. Yeah. I mean, on that point of being able to see yourself or connect with yourself and another child, it's like, yeah, most of our expressed healing work has happened in adulthood. Right. So we're looking back or trying to look back from this adult, although messed up and regressed, held back adult consciousness, but adult consciousness. So then to really get in touch with, like, right, this is what a child consciousness looks and feels like. It's so easy to forget that. Yeah.
They want to go out and hike and hang from the trees, not be locked in a room and being molested by someone who tells them that they love them.
Right.
Right. And but they want to be loved and they want attention.
Want love.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, they just want to be seen and heard and loved and be validated as a person. And you wanted all that as a kid.
Yeah.
Right? But I think when you're taught that that's what love looks like, because you're so young, like I was like, okay, well, this must happen in every family. Like this just must be what happens in every family. Like this, this thing.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. And then you spend your entire life undoing it all.
Yeah. So speaking of validation, you mentioned like wanting to be validated. That makes me think of your aunt, Pat, in your life. I mean, it seemed like a pretty powerful, special figure in your life and amongst so many adults that were not safe.
Yes.
Maybe someone that made you feel, one of the few or only that made you feel safe. Is that right?
Yes, I feel like I'm finishing out her work in a way because she was so brilliant and so healing. And so for what she had been through, just such a grounded, amazing spirit. And certainly I would not be where I am without her. And just took on everyone's stuff. And with that said, I learned a lot from that too, because as I've healed, I've realized that I've sort of surpassed her healing and how far she got in her healing in her life. And I think for her, it was a little impossible because she just wanted everything to be okay. And it never was going to be okay. Because the things that he did was never going to have not happened. And, I think she just wanted us all to be a family so badly. And I don't feel like that's necessary if you're not on the same path with the people that need to heal.
When you were so young and this abuse was happening, from your grandfather. How did you know to keep it a secret?
Oh,
Like
because
were there specific? Sorry,
You
say
say
that
he told
again.
you?
I cut you off.
no, I said he tried to kill me, like many times.
So he told you to keep it a secret, and then
Like he would try to suffocate me. And so I just in general was like terrified if I spoke about it, like that I was going to die.
Right.
So I was afraid for my life, literally.
so there's this.
My gosh.
I'm thinking about. We had a question about your relationship with pain.
Mm.
So that kind of made me think about it. There's this violence in your abuse, and this relationship seems to have changed. This relationship with pain has changed throughout your life. Can you talk a little bit about what your relationship is like with pain and how it's changed?
I think when I was dancing, which is so funny, Wade, because I think we were like, or a lot of my friends were dancing for you in my
Really?
20s. Yeah. Because it was, did you ever go to the shelter? Was that like
Yeah, not frequently, but I went there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of my friends were dancing for you at the time. But when I was with Alvin Ailey, I was in their professional program. And I think that saved me on a massive level, just moving my body. And one of the doctors who endorsed my book, Dr. Bruce Perry, who's an amazingly brilliant doctor, trauma doctor, he had said to me, you don't even realize that you were healing yourself with your dance, because like the movement of the body is so important. And you were doing it without even realizing like the reason you were doing it. But I was so attracted to it, and it just made me feel better mentally. But I think when I got into stunt work, that started happening obviously more. Like dancing wasn't really pain driven. It was more like, from my heart and just from like the love of like dancing. But when I started doing stunts and just, getting hurt was something that was really kind of enjoyable to me. And not getting hurt, like it wasn't, I didn't want to get hurt to where I broke my leg and couldn't walk. It was just like, I wanted to get hurt. I wanted my outsides to match my insides is what I've sort of figured out. And so I think because people weren't getting it, especially my family, the amount of pain that I was in, especially my father, I struggled a lot with that with my dad.
Yeah.
If I had an injury on the outside of my body, like stitches or cuts or whatever it was like I got this attention for my pain.
Right.
But really, I needed the attention for the pain that was happening on the inside of me.
It was like a way for you to speak before you could speak. It was like, here are my wounds, and here's my pain.
I think so.
Because that started pretty early as well, right? I mean, you spoke in the book about like you having scabs and continuing to peel them off to kind of seemingly keep the wounds open, and
yes,
and there were other experiences like that when you were young.
Yes, I was a cutter, and it was all really just for attention. I mean, I wanted so badly for my parents to see how much pain I was in, and it didn't work, unfortunately. And I think that that's very common amongst people that have been abused, because you have so much inside of you that you don't know what to do with, and you can't make sense of it because it doesn't make sense. And so it has to come out in other ways.
Right.
Cutting, could people see your cuts, and your parents were just ignoring it?
Oh yeah, I would cut my face.
Yeah. And what reaction, if any, did they ever give you? Just none?
None.
Right.
I think a lot of that was just,
I'm bleeding here. Can you not see me? Like, my God.
yeah, well, exactly. And exactly that. And I remember, and I'm grateful it never happened, but I remember like begging my parents to check me into like a psych ward. I was like, I just want to be in a hospital. I just want like a doctor to just take care of me. And my dad, is very much of the, my daughter's not going to a psych, and it's not happening, but I just wanted someone to recognize what I was going through. And when it's happening on the inside and no one sees it, it's like when you're going about your day and you come across someone who's like super angry and you're like, oh God, but clearly they are having some sort of pain inside, something going on in their life, and it's just bleeding out, which is why I had to separate from my family, because I've watched generationally how not dealing with their trauma has affected them. My mother's siblings, who are now in their 70s, behaving in ways that you behave when you're 14. And I do a lot of work with Dr. Schwartz, who started Internal Family Systems. Yeah. And he does a lot of work with like parts of you. And I've found that to be really helpful, because it's sort of his whole thought process behind it is kind of like, you get stunted in your growth when something really traumatic happens to you. So if you're abused and you're carrying like a tremendous amount of guilt or shame or whatever it is, like your 7-year-old self like stops growing there. Like it's not healed. So it's just kind of sitting there. So if you're triggered, if something triggers you from that space, your reaction is coming from your 7-year-old self. It's not coming from your adult self. And I've watched myself do that, and I try to be more aware of it, but I think it's probably something, that I need to work on more, which is super fun, because I'm like, when is this going to stop? When do I get to stop doing this?
Right. When do I get to finally declare that I'm healed? And I'm done?
I don't know that it ever will be, but I think that conversations are so important to have. And I've been in rooms with older people that still have relationships with their abusers, that still are trying to figure out, how do I navigate this? My dad did this to me, and, we're still in a relationship. And to me, that's just so sad, because I'm in such a different place, but it just shows you the amount of control that the family system has over you, and to make you feel like you can't walk away even after they've done these horrific things to you.
Right. Right.
You don't have a close connection with your birth family, but you've built a survivor and friendship circle that is like your new family, or family that you've chosen.
Yes.
Can you speak about what that support group has done for you and the importance of it?
Yeah, I call them my chosen family. Mm-hmm. And for me, really, it's the people that I've chosen to surround myself with, or the people that are doing the work on their stuff, regardless of what that is. And it doesn't need to be sexual abuse, but we all have trauma. We all have, I don't think you go through life and not have some sort of trauma happen to you. Obviously, there's some that are worse than others, but I've chosen to surround my daughter with people that are actively working on themselves, because I don't want her to be, as much as I love my sisters, and I do from a space of, I've had to find a place of compassion for them and that they're doing their best. But I don't want my daughter to see that behavior, or to see that, like, this is how we deal with things, or like the walking on eggshells, or the can't say this, or you can't say this, or this is, I don't want that for her. I don't want an ounce of what I grew up in for her. And I think, people so often get so fixated on, well, it's your mom, it's your dad. It's like, how can you not have a relationship with them? Instead of asking the other question, which is like, what did your mom or your dad do that made you get to this point where you've decided that you no longer can have a relationship with them?
Right.
And I think that's another part of the shame that's put on the survivor of whatever you're surviving that you may have experienced with your parents. You know, it's like, oh God, it's your mom. You have to talk to your mom. It's like, okay, but obviously something really bad must have happened in order for me to get to this space where I'm actually needing to do this for myself and for my now family in order to raise my daughter in a different way.
Right. I mean, so much of the pain is exacerbated by being caught in how things should be or how they're supposed to be, rather than us being able to, and us, of course, and then obviously, like you're talking about, people around us being able to lean into accepting how they actually are, and how do we move from that rather than what they're supposed to be.
Yeah. And I think too, when you're abused from such a young age, I don't know if you guys felt this, but I was like, I don't know who I am.
Right.
Like, I didn't know who I was without him.
Yeah.
Because he identified me, because I served such a purpose for him, which is how he made me feel, which wasn't on me, but it's how he made me feel. So it was like, I didn't really know who I was without him. Right. And which is terrifying that another human being could actually do that to you.
Yeah.
You know, but when your brain is forming and the abuse is happening at the same time, that's kind of what happens.
Right. When it's so young, like you said, your brain is developing the foundation for who you are, and this abuse is happening. It's interesting. You say you don't know who you are. You'll never know because it happened so young. You never know who you are going to be. And do you mourn that, or I don't know how much to think about that, or just accept it? Like, all right, this is the experience that I had, and it formed me with who I am now. But yeah, yes. You don't know who you were going to be, because it was like at the time when you were forming who you are, and then you're going through this abuse. So it's like, it's a part of you. It's part of your core makeup.
100%. And I think that that's something I've really struggled with. And seeing my daughter now, I'm like, she has so much of me in her, in the sense of like, minus the abuse. Yeah. And so I feel like I watch her and I'm like, okay, Kim, this is probably the closest to what you would have been.
Yeah.
Which is just free and safe and just so comfortable with herself. And even just, the way we just talk about our bodies, I think is so important as parents. It's like, I know so many parents that just, oh, they're too young. I'm like, no, they're not too young, because pedophiles are a real thing. And they don't know, there's no like age where it started for me. It's so young. So for me, I'm like, no, she's going to know all the words, what the body parts are, why we don't allow people to, why it's not comfortable, she's going to know all that. And she's going to, feel comfortable enough with herself that she can speak about it. We were on a trip to Hawaii a few weeks ago, and we went horseback riding, and there was this guy who took a picture of her. And because I've made her so aware of all of those things, she came up to me. She goes, "That man just took a picture of me, Mom." And I was like, I saw that. And I just went up to him and I said, "Did you just take a picture of my daughter?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I said, can you please delete that? She's not your child. Don't take a picture of her, And I feel like for her to see me do those things for her, just, as I'm sure you deal with your kids, like when you have those moments with them where you can be that person for them that you didn't have,
Yeah.
just feels really fulfilling.
Yeah,
Like you're
absolutely.
doing the right thing, and you're just what you guys have been through and what you've chosen to do with it. And I know it wasn't easy, and I'm sure it still isn't, is amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When you, just a moment ago, when you said that piece of that, that your grandfather, in a way, when you were young, identified you, gave you a sense of identity and gave you a place and a role. Gosh, it makes me think of for me, it was one of the most heartbreaking, terrifying lines in your book. When you said that he said to you, "I'm doing this to you because you're the prettiest one." I mean, there's just so much to unpack there, some of which being just the connections to beauty and like this, like, because you're beautiful, you deserve to be abused. I mean, there's so much there. I'm just wondering, amongst all of it, lines like that and that kind of teaching enmeshed with the abuse. I mean, what that did to you, how that played out through your young life and your young adult life.
Yeah. And my whole family was very much that way. My grandmother was very much that way. Everything was about how we looked, how we dressed, how we, it was all about the exterior, right? Because if you had to look at the interior, everyone would have fallen apart. So I think that was part of his grooming with me. And I think now that we actually have words for it, he was clearly a complete narcissist. And
Right.
I think for him, it was a control mechanism because the abuse started so young. He probably knew me better than I knew myself.
Mm.
And he knew the buttons to push and he knew the things to say to keep me where I was. It felt like, and I say this in the book too, I felt like it was my job. Like, this is what I'm here for. Like, I'm here to, this is what he is telling me we're doing. And this is like part of what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And I think it was just one of the things that he used because my family was so obsessed with looks. And I looked a lot like my mother when I was young. And I think that was probably part of it too. But I also didn't look like any of my siblings. I'm like very, my dad always said that he thinks the mailman was my father, which is a whole other thing. I don't think he was my father, but I mean, I don't, if he was, I don't want to know because I have too much to deal with as it is.
Right.
So going into adulthood, then, when you receive compliments from like adult lovers, right? Did that bring up, I mean, those must be intertwined, right? Your feelings about your sexuality and beauty. And now you're having somebody say that to you, which would be appropriate as an adult. But how did you feel about that? Were they mixed, those two experiences?
I lived in New York for a really long time. And when you walk the streets of New York, there was always a store. So there's always like a reflection in the mirror. And I would always look at myself. And it was always looked at from my family like, oh, you're so conceited. You're so, why are you always staring at yourself? For me, it was the complete opposite. It was me feeling so ugly because I think he made me feel so ugly on the inside that I was actually trying to find something attractive about myself.
Right.
That didn't have to do with him, because when he died, although I was super relieved, is when then all the unpacking started. And that was a huge thing for me.
So if you receive a compliment as an adult, do you just think how do you take that? How do you take
like a physical, like you're
yeah, how do you
beautiful
take a
kind of
physical compliment now internally?
Now I'm better. For a while, it was really uncomfortable for me. Like I would always put it on the other person, like, no, you look so beautiful, like hard
Just
to accept.
deflect it.
Yeah. Like hard to accept it. So now I have a picture of my child self on my mirror and I talk to her, and I think that had a lot to do with it too, because I had this feeling with her for a long time where we were so separate, and I was so angry with her for allowing this to happen to us. And now I feel a lot more integrated with her, with the work that I've done, and realize that actually she's the one who survived it all, not me. So I'm able to, I feel like she trusts me again now, where I feel like for a long time she didn't trust me. I don't think she felt like I was safe because I wasn't taking care of her the way she needed me to.
Right. Speaking of that connection with your little one, little Kimberly, sounds like there's been lots of, like you've been talking about inner child work, and lots of moments of that kind of gradually rebuilding that relationship. But you spoke about in the book some MDMA assisted therapy, and it seemed like some particularly large moments around that connection with her, little Kimberly, happened during that. Is that right?
Yes. Have you guys done any of that kind of work?
No, we haven't. We did a podcast episode with interviewing an expert about it. So I'm definitely intrigued, but I haven't.
It's really amazing. It took me a minute to say yes to it, because I was like, yeah, I really don't, I dabbled with drugs in my 20s and it's nothing like that. For me, I felt like, and I think this is pretty much what it does, it sort of takes your fight or flight mode out, and it enables you to just kind of like sit with the truth of things. And every journey was different for me. But when I was in that space with her, she showed me a lot. So I had a lot more memories during that time. I was able to connect the dots in a much bigger way.
She meaning little Kimberly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every time I did a journey, it was like she showed me more and showed me more. And I remember texting Gabor and saying, now not being in the space of the journey space, just in my normal life, she would, like, I would look down in the shower and I'd see her feet, like tiny little feet. And it would like completely freak me out. And I texted him, I was like, is this normal? And he's like, yes, now that she trusts you, she's going to show more of herself to you because she feels safe with you. And I think that was a really important part of my healing, to do that.
New memories come with the MDMA therapy?
Yeah. Yes.
New memory, yeah. But you were in a safe place, to a non-judgmental place to kind of receive those memories.
You're in a safe place, and you're also with a doctor who you worked with, at least how I did it. I worked with her for a few months in like therapy wise before we actually did it. So I really trusted her. And so when I would have these memories, it was so important for me. And I would say to her, I need you to tell me that I'm safe. I need you to tell me that you believe me. It was all these things that were coming out. And to have an adult there, because in those moments, I was not my age. I was a child, like in that sense. And, her just looking at me and telling me, you're safe, I believe you, was so healing, because I never had that.
So she was telling little Kimberly that she's safe and believed.
Yes.
I also wanted to talk about a little bit, because I feel like so many survivors deal with it, so many people deal with it, is that, you've had some challenges with relationship with food, right? Through your young life, particularly, and maybe some of your adult life. If you can just speak to what some of your experiences were with that.
I still have challenges with food.
Okay.
I don't think they'll ever go away. They've definitely gotten better. Like they're completely under control. But I think in the beginning, it really was a control thing for me. I felt like it was the one thing that I could control. And because I felt so out of control, and when I had my memories and I told my mom, my father didn't believe me.
Right.
So I went through a period of that. So I felt like my world was just completely I didn't feel like I had any control over anything. So it became food for me. And so I was bulimic for a while, but it wasn't a calorie thing for me. It wasn't a weight thing at that time because I was like very skinny and I was a gymnast and I was tiny. So it then morphed into like in the dance world, being a woman in the dance world, it can be a little bit rough with the body image stuff. So as I got older and, your body changes as a woman, then it did become about my weight.
Right.
Yeah.
When you said in the beginning, it wasn't so much about calories. I mean, I thought that was so powerful in the book when you spoke about like this, it was more about the purge, like the opportunity to purge what felt like him or your experiences. Is that right?
Yes. And I will say, I think it's been 2 holidays now that I've spent without my family. And that's the first 2 holidays in my entire life. And every single holiday up until the 2 I haven't spent with my family, I always threw up.
Wow.
And the last 2 I have not.
Right. It's just such a deep psychological connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Amazing. And so it's still there as a challenge to some degree, this relationship with food, but different now.
Yeah. I mean, it's not so much a challenge for me anymore. I think just in general, like then I picked, a profession in Hollywood, which especially when I got in the business, everybody was 4 pounds and drinking Diet Coke and smoking cigarettes. And I was like, well, I have to actually be in shape to do my job. So I can't be 4 pounds, but I mean, who knows if subconsciously that's why I picked that profession as well. But, all of my actresses were always tall, blonde, and skinny. So
I believe later in life, you got into martial arts. You added that and you got your black belt in Taekwondo.
Yes.
Yep. Can you talk to us a little bit about what martial arts has done for you, if anything?
I think it became like my new dance, like my new kind of outlet for my body. And I think, I know that it feels really good to know that I could actually kill someone with my hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not that I would just say that, but
if you had to,
but if I had to, if I was being attacked or if something was happening. And my husband always says that. He's like, I feel like if we're ever in an alley, I'll probably go. I'm like, really? But yeah, I think there's something about, for me emotionally, about like punching bags and getting that anger out, because it has to go somewhere, it's been a good outlet for my anger, I think.
Yeah. You spoke about this a little bit earlier, and James, you brought it up too, as far as just your relationship with physical movement through your life. And, what Dr. Bruce brought up to you about, you didn't know what you were doing as far as going after dance and that being a modality that helped you heal. Yeah. It seems like there's been this, just from what I learned from the book and this talk, this transition from physical movement being a sort of unconscious survival strategy to it kind of gradually for you becoming more and more of a conscious healing modality to move your body. Is that right?
For sure. Yeah. And I think when I started doing Taekwondo, I became more aware that like when I be punching paddles or kicking, like, literally imagining like that being his head and me, and it actually being a moment where I was aware that like, okay, this is what I need. And this is his face. And this is what I'm going to hit. And, doing it consciously and not unconsciously.
You had an experience at his grave site, his gravestone, where you engaged in an act. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about that? I've just found it really powerful.
Oh, just that I wrote child molester on his gravestone.
When was that? Like about how old were you? Or
I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because people were still idolizing him, and some of my family still does. As far as his children go. Some of his children never had memories, although I'm pretty certain it happened to everybody. I mean, he did, he wrote many confession letters that were found throughout the family throughout the years. And so I think, a lot of his children have still not acknowledged who he really was. I can't speak for anyone else's story, but I don't see someone like him being around any child and them getting like a free pass.
Right.
From him.
Right.
I mean, I think that if you're a pedophile, you're a pedophile. And if there's a child in front of you, you're going to abuse them.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that you writing child molester on his gravestone? Like, is that still there? Do you know? Or
I haven't been back. I'm guessing they probably cleaned it.
Right.
I think my grandmother heard about it and she wasn't very happy, but nobody knew who did it. So.
Okay. Until now.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm with you. Like I get it. Like, what an act.
Can I ask you guys something? And you don't have to put this on there.
No, of course.
How does it feel for you guys just because of who your abuser was? And because, by the way, like Michael Jackson is banned in my home. Like, how does that feel for you guys that in some ways or in some, like with some people that he's still this idol?
A lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, even after leaving Neverland, there's musicals put on about him, and they're going to do a movie about him. And he seems to get this pass that I don't quite understand. It's this like the selective anger at some people and not others. So it hurts. I'm trying to figure out how to deal with it, but it's there. I mean, he's shows up every day in some form, a reference of a song or on television. And it's a constant reminder of the abuse and that people love him, and it's difficult to deal with.
Yeah. I bet.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely gotten easier for me than especially how it was like once right at the beginning of my kind of expressed healing journey, like once I disclosed, and that was extremely difficult. I mean, as far as music came on anywhere or praise for him happened anywhere, it was just extremely triggering, and I had to remove myself from the situation any way I could. That's become a lot easier now, and fortunately, unfortunately, as you know, like we tend to just normalize as much as possible to things. So it's a lot easier, but it's disappointing at times,
How has it been for you with your dance? Because so much of it started with him, right? your dance, not
Yeah.
being a talented dancer, but just like being affiliated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a huge piece. I mean, he was my introduction to dance. He was my dance inspiration. So yeah, again, once I sort of began this expressed healing journey, my whole relationship with dance just completely crumbled. And I quit and, wanted to have nothing to do with it ever and ever again. And thankfully, again, as you know, like we think we know where things are going and what the healing journey is going to look like. And when you feel something in such a strong way at some point, it always feels like you're going to feel that way forever. But with really dedicated healing work and meditation and therapy and all these things, that over time, it took about 5 years of pushing dance away completely. And then something shifted in me and a new kind of curiosity came back. And it was an acknowledgement, almost when you talk about identity, like an acknowledgement came back for me that before Michael, like before my relationship with Michael and everything that happened, dance was mine, right? It was pure. It was a gift and it was mine. And then some tainted things happened to that relationship. So then it became this opportunity to kind of reclaim that relationship that was mine. So that's been a beautiful new part of the healing journey for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't make you a good dancer. You did.
Thank you. We touched on this a little bit, but I kind of want to come to sort of where you are now, like your experiences with men and romantic relationships and intimacy as a young adult and moving through that, where, I mean, you speak about it a certain amount in the book, and I could imagine were understandably challenging, triggering, and so many things coming up in intimate situations with men. Then you meet Casey. Yeah. You're now husband and father of your child. What was different? Or, once the relationship began with him, maybe in you, in the relationship himself, in him, and then kind of what role has he played in your healing journey, would you say?
I don't know how I got him to marry me, to be honest with you. He's like really normal. And I honestly don't know how, because when I met him, I was still in a really sort of dark space. So, when I met him, I was journaling a lot then. And my whole take at that time was like, I just want you to know like how fucked up I am. So like, read this, because you're obviously not going to want me, because this is like, I'm a complete disaster and your life is going to be a mess and he read my journals, and we were in Spain at the time filming a movie, and he just hugged me and he said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." And I was like, okay, so he's not running. So that's a good thing. And honestly, I don't know. He's probably one of the most patient people I've ever met. And he just really, I think I probably cried every day for the first year we were together, just because I was going through a lot of transitional stuff with my abuse and my family. And he was always very perplexed in how I even had relationships with anyone in my family. But with him being perplexed about it, he never judged me or never said that I shouldn't. He always supported my decisions and, just like really stuck it out with me. And we definitely have been to therapy together for him to better understand me, and had to really have an open communication about like, okay, if I'm in this space, you need to ask me what I need so I can tell you what I need, whether that's like, I need you to leave me alone, or I need a hug, or I can't have you touch me. Unfortunately, those are the conversations you have to have, because you're relationship with sex and intimacy and all of those things are completely askew and not, normal, I would say. And during my 20s, I just was kind of with a ton of guys, because for me, it was easier like to not have an attachment. Like I didn't feel like I deserved to be loved. I didn't want to be loved. I didn't want any of that. And if I did, it was in a relationship that was extremely unhealthy.
Yeah.
So when I met him, it was completely different. And he just, I would say, if it wasn't for him just like really sticking it out with me, and I think seeing something in me that I never saw in myself. And like when I had my daughter, and I just kept saying to him, like, I'm the worst mom. I can't be a mom. Like, I don't know how to be a mom. He would always just say, that's ridiculous. You're an amazing mom. Like, stop saying that to yourself. And I think he's probably the first person who really believed in me despite what I had been through, and acknowledged that it wasn't my fault. And for me, that was something I had never encountered before. And so he's been amazing. Not that we don't have our times. I mean, it's not easy to go through what we've all been through and have this like perfect fairy tale marriage. Just doesn't work like that.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right. And it's, I think expecting that or imagining it should be that way is the thing that would cause so much more friction and so much more pain.
Yes.
It's like trying to lean into that, like, it's going to be up, down, left, and right. And I've got all this extra baggage, and, you've got your own as well. But we're here together through it all. Right.
And also just having the truth. The truth is, and I say it in the book, and it's like one of my favorite quotes, like, the truth is so easy. Why don't we say it more? And it's so true, because so many times I think people feel like they need to sugarcoat things for their kids. And of course, I don't mean, blatantly saying things that they shouldn't hear at a child's age, but I will say this because I think it's really important. With my daughter, there was a situation that happened over the summer where my entire family was in New York. And she really wanted to see her cousins, because up until that point, I had had relationships with my sisters. So she had really good relationships with her cousins. And she said, Mommy, I want to see my cousins. I want to see my cousins. And so I texted my one sister who I, at the time, was speaking to the most. And I said, can we meet at the beach? Capri, really, regardless of how anyone feels about me, I want my daughter. She wants to see her cousins. And my sister said, absolutely. And then we were completely not invited, and everyone just ignored the fact that we were even there. And my daughter was in tears, and she just looked at me and she said, Mommy, what did I do? I love my cousins. And it was that moment where I realized, if I stay in this system of my family, my daughter is going to think that something that my grandfather did all these years ago to create this trauma in my family somehow is her fault. And I will not let that happen. And that's when I pulled away from everybody. And I had to have a conversation with her. She wanted to know why. And she's very inquisitive, as you know, as they are at that age. I want to know why, Mom. I want to know why they don't want to see you. And I want to know why. And I said, because every adult, just because you're an adult doesn't mean that you're not hurting, and it doesn't mean you haven't been through something, and it doesn't mean you don't have pain. And sometimes that pain comes out on the people you love the most. And that's a really hard thing to understand as a child, but that's what's going on. And she said, well, I want an example, because when something happens at school with a friend, you always want an example, and you're not giving me an example. And so my husband was there with me, and he said to her, Capri, you know how Mommy and Daddy's job, our number one job, is to protect you. And she said, yes. And he said, Mommy wasn't protected when she was a kid. And her sisters still hold a lot of pain for that. And that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
And then she said, who hurt you, mommy? And I said, grandma's dad. And she said, did he hurt you with his heart? Did he hurt your heart, or did he hurt you with his hands?
Mm.
And I said, both. And it was just in that moment, because we were able to do it in a way where she could comprehend it without diving into something that was not appropriate. She just hugged me and she just said she was sorry. And that was it. And it was just simple. I mean, it was painful, but it was simple. And she could comprehend it and understand it. And I just thought when she walked away, like, wow, we can do this in the right way,
Right.
with her understanding age appropriately that not everything is perfect in this world.
Mm.
What a divine blessing for you and for Casey, and most importantly for your daughter, for you to be able to just really sit with her and again give her something you never got, and just really give her the truth in an appropriate but real, loving, honest way. I mean, there's no greater equipment you can equip her with,
Yes.
And it's all
Beautiful.
the work you've done comes out there, right? Because you're not controlled by the abuse because you've faced it. You're facing it, right? You're able to, you're not reacting to it, blindly or, subconsciously. You're able to take actions and not let it control you. And that's all the work that you've done.
Clearly you guys have too. So
Yeah.
One last question, which is the title of the book, Glimmer.
Yeah.
So what is your glimmer?
She's my inner child. She's my little Kimberly.
Hmm.
And that was supposed to be the last question, but I've got one last one. Just along those lines, just to sort of wrap it up for, our listeners, right? That are mostly, if not all, survivors of some kind of trauma. Is there just any word that, through this whole healing journey that you've been through and that you're still on, any words of encouragement or just hope that you would want to spread to other survivors that are on their own journey of healing?
I think that there's really no right way to do it, in the sense of this person did it this way, so I should do it that way. We all have our own trauma and we all have our own path and we all have our own journey that we need to follow. But I think the most important thing is staying true to what that is and really sitting with yourself and really trying to listen to what that is. And if you're still surrounding yourself with people that are contributing to your trauma, you need to step away. You will never fully heal, if you're surrounding yourself with people that made you sick in the first place.
Mm. Yes. Amazing. Kimberly, it's such an honor to finally meet, virtually, but face to face.
You guys too.
And, just so happy for the healing that has occurred and that is continuing to occur for you, and the courage it took to write this book. And it's really powerful. It's really honest and introspective and painful and beautiful and all the things you would want. And I just think it's what sounds like your hope. Like it's going to help a lot of people. So
thank you.
Congratulations.
I hope so. I appreciate you having me.
Well, Kimberly, it's just so wonderful to have you here. And, just thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Yeah. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I look up to you guys a lot.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
Sweet. We appreciate it. I love this conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Where should people go to learn more about you, learn about the book, or
you can
as far as
go
the website? Or
Yeah, you can go to my website, which is KimberlyShannonMurphy.com, and you can buy it. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble, so you can kind of get it anywhere. And the Audible you can also get the Audible on Amazon, which is read by Caitlin Olson.
All right, Kimberly, good to see you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Continued healing.
You too. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
This is From Trauma
To Triumph.